evil be cleansed.
So, as you just saw, Jinhsi can deliver some serious nuke damage, and after playing with her for a while, there's a lot of things that surprised me about her, and today I'm gonna be going over how to build Jinhsi and Blair so that you can beat some of the hardest content in the game. Now, let's start with the most important part of the video, how to maximize Jinhsi's potential and how do her abilities work. I'll be using her with the Celestial set to showcase the abilities and damage, while her main echo is going to be the new boss Wuwa, but keep in mind, I'll cover all of her builds later in the video. Also, you can see here I got pretty decent stat rolls all across the board, and I managed to reach really high crit damage. Oh, and by the way, keep in mind this is a Sequence 0 guide and showcase. And starting with the basic attack, it's a 4-string combo that delivers really low damage, and the same can be said about her heavy attack as well as the mid-air attack. They're just not great and are pretty clunky. However, you will want to use the full 4 basic attack combo, because this will allow her to transition into a more powerful state where she can unleash that insanely powerful damage. But how do you actually produce that big number with Jinhsi? Well, it all has to do with her skill, sort of. You see, there are 4 stages of the skill, so let me explain all of them. Now, starting with stage 1, by just simply tapping the skill button, she will perform this really weak slash and go on cooldown for 3 seconds. I do not recommend using this first stage skill, it's simply not worth it to waste precious time in hard content, unless maybe there are some weird rotations where it's beneficial to use it. But moving over to stage 2, after she performs 4 basic attacks, you can see here the skill lights up, and by pressing it, she will deal small AoE damage, go into air, and even actually group up the enemies. Most importantly, from this moment on, she enters a special mode of her Forte circuit called Incarnation. So, while in this mode, she can use her stage 3 skill called Crescent Divinity, which honestly has pretty decent multiplier. And with this skill, she can also launch enemies into air. However, this will put the skill into cooldown for 10 seconds, but it will be reset after she reaches stage 4 skill. Also, you can press the skill at stage 2 and cancel it with dash or jump to do the stage 3 skill for faster animations. Okay, so stage 4 skill called Illuminous Epiphany, that's where the insane damage comes from. But it's a pretty big and convoluted ability, so let me break it down by going through the rest of the Forte circuit. You see, after Jinhsi goes into air thanks to stage 2 skill and enters the Incarnation mode, she gains a whole set of different abilities she can do thanks to her Forte circuit. First of all, her basic attacks are now replaced by the new basics. It's a 4-hit combo, and after fully completing it, she will gain the ability to cast her stage 4 skill. She can also do an alternative dodge counter and heavy or mid-air attack in this mode, but after testing her rotations so far, it's best to just quickly whip out those 4 basic attacks instead. Also, all damage here, as far as I'm aware, is considered to be skill damage, which is nice. So for example, those 4 basic attacks will scale with skill damage substats and buffs. By the way, after 4 basics, her basics then become all heavy attacks, but they are not worth using, and it's better to just immediately use the final stage 4 skill. Okay, so you complete the 4 basic attacks while in the Incarnation mode, and suddenly you see this beautiful stage 4 skill light up and press it. Wait, what? Why is the damage so low? What the f— Alright, so by itself, stage 4 skill is actually pretty terrible. However, to go from bad to badass damage, you will need to build special stacks on her called Incandescence. And from now on, I'll just either call it stacks or Forte stacks. So, Jinhsi can hold up to 50 stacks, and there's a visual representation of them at the bottom here. It's kinda hard to count it, but here's a few image examples to see stack amounts. Now, to build the stacks, the ability called Eras in Unity will always be active for the whole team, and whenever somebody deals attribute damage, 1 stack will be granted every 3 seconds. But, and this is a big but, if the damage is dealt by a coordinated attack, then 2 additional stacks will be granted, gaining a total of 3 stacks. However, if 2 same attribute attacks are delivered within this 3-second cooldown, only one of them counts. So, for example, if Marina's coordinated attack is dealt along Jinhsi's attack, a total of 3 stacks will be gained. But if this was Mortefi instead, then when Jinhsi attacks, now she gains 4 stacks. And you guessed it, coordinated attacks can be combined. So for example, if Yinlin and Mortefi's coordinated attacks are active, one single attack with Jinhsi could produce 7 stacks every 3 seconds. Still, there's one extremely crucial part that needs to be mentioned now. The 3-second cooldown is very limiting, so to help alleviate this problem, when Jinhsi uses her outro skill for 20 seconds, the cooldown limit goes from 3 to only 1 second. So yeah, with this team comp I mentioned before, now every second can produce 7 stacks. Okay, so now we can go back to her stage 4 skill, and by building up the stacks with the whole team, we can finally unleash that big satisfying number. And what do you know, after casting this skill, Jinhsi also gains an extremely powerful ability called Unison, which allows Jinhsi when swapping to trigger her outro and the swap teammate's intro. If that's not enough, this Unison buff is consumed instead of her concerto. So if she had a full concerto circle ready, Unison is the first one to be consumed, and then you can swap back to her again and trigger her outro once more. Now, the cooldown on Unison is 25 seconds, so this won't happen every rotation, but it's still a very powerful ability. Now, that was a lot of yapping for that big boom attack, so let's take a breather and quickly look at her ultimate. I mean, yeah, it just deals big bada bing damage, nowhere as huge as skill 4 with all stacks, but ironically, the multiplier is still better than Havoc Rover's ultimate, which was the hardest hitting ulti previously. And then as for her intro skill, it's like whatever damage, nothing amazing. There's also an inherent skill you can unlock to boost the damage further, which is fine. However, the best thing about her intro is that her skill states when she uses the intro, she can immediately cast her stage 2 skill, letting her skip the 4 basic attacks initially. Also, since I mentioned the inherent skill, the other one just straight up provides 20% spectral damage increase, which is really good. So, now that her whole kit has been covered, how does her rotation look like? Well, you will usually want to start the fights with her. So, activate the Echo and do 4 basic attacks, press skill again for that stage 3 damage, do 4 more basic attacks, and finish off with the stage 4 skill. But the damage will be very low for the first time. However, by swapping out, you will trigger Unison, which immediately allows her to activate outro for better stacks, and trigger swap allies intro. From then on, do the 2 ally rotations, which I'll talk about later in team section, and swap back to Jinhsi. In this second rotation, start with the ultimate, immediately use her skill, which puts her into incarnation mode thanks to her intro, use Echo, then use skill, followed by 4 basic attacks, and finish off with a powerful skill nuke and swap out. Now, to be honest, the way you want to incorporate ultimate will vary a lot, depending on how much energy regen Jinhsi has. Like, most of the time, you will trigger her ultimate every other rotation, and you can, if you want to, start even the first rotation with her ultimate. Keep in mind, her main echoes and ultimate have pretty long cooldowns, so you still want to use them early in her rotation, to make sure you can come back to them after other teammates are done and have them ready. Also, to have a better understanding of her potential, here's the damage breakdown. The skill damage takes up about 70% of her total output, while ultimate is 20%, and Echo as well as the intro skill make up about 5% damage each. So yeah, her skill damage is basically the entire damage potential, more or less. All in all, Jinhsi's kit might seem complex, but once you get into the groove of just doing the following rotation, she becomes pretty easy to understand and play, especially considering if you want to be sweaty and incorporate quick swapping. Since when she's in incarnation mode, you can actually swap out and still come back to that mode because it lasts for 10 seconds. Anyway, enough about the gameplay, let's talk about how to build Jinhsi. Okay, so this is probably going to be the saddest section of the video because there's one big problem with Jinhsi. She doesn't have any great free-to-play options when it comes to weapons. Now, starting off with our best in slot option, Aegis of Harvest is a really strong and amazing weapon. The passive is easy to trigger, and with the rotations I've shown, you can fully utilize it. But moving over to Verdant Summit, overall it deals about 17% less damage than her signature weapon, and besides the 12% attribute damage boost, the rest of the passive doesn't matter. On the same note, Illustrious Razor passive can at least be fully utilized. Just make sure to cast ultimate after at least one skill tap to gain the damage bonus. However, it is about 1-3% worse than Verdant Summit. So GN's weapon just has better raw stats overall. And then, moving over to 4-star options, honestly, it's a really bad situation here. A lot of people expected that the Battle Pass weapon Autumn Trace will work, and it kinda does. but only when doing the initial 4 basic attacks. Because if you use her 4 basic attacks after entering Incarnation, they are treated as skill damage, so you cannot gain the passive. And this weapon loses its purpose after second rotation, since her intro can't put her into Incarnation immediately. Still, it does offer critical rate from substat, so you can use it as a raw stat stick, but it will be about 38% weaker than her signature weapon. Yeah, it's pretty sad. Now, the irony here is that both Helios Cleaver and the craftable weapon Broadblade number 41 can actually pull their weight a bit more, provided you have enough critical rate from echoes. Both at max 5 copies are about 15% worse than Illustrious Razor and 33% weaker than Signature. And then, as a worst case scenario, if you're just starting out, you can use the 3-star weapons Broadblade of Night or Guardian Broadblade. Like, honestly, if you still haven't cracked your Union level 45 package, you should grab the Illustrious Razor from it, since it's really decent compared to the signature. Otherwise, use one of the other weapons, and I mean even then, they are pretty fine. So don't get discouraged when I say they are worse than the signature weapon. Now, moving over to her echoes, the main and only set you want to use will be the Celestial 5-piece set. You could go for a double 2 set of Lingering Tunes and Celestial, or go with a full Lingering Tunes as well, but they will perform about 10 to 12% worse than Celestial 5 set. And as for the main stats, they are a bit different than usual. The most reliable loadout will be 4-3-3-1-1 cost echoes, with 4 cost having crit rate or crit damage, 3 costs using attack percent and spectro or double spectro, and then 1 cost obviously should have attack percent main stat. Now, the thing about the 3-cost echoes is that attack percent and spectral damage come out a bit ahead in damage, like few percent, since she gains a lot of attribute damage from 5-star weapons like Verdant Summit and Idrisil Harvest, but any other weapon will be fine with double spectral. And then, those of you who are crazy enough to wail for Jinhsi, you can go for alternative 4-4-1-1-1, which has double crit damage, but it's about as good as 4-3-3-1-1. Anyway, aside from wailing, substat priority is pretty simple. Critical rate and damage come first, then attack percent, then resonance skill damage, and then finally, flat attack, energy regen, and resonance liberation damage all share about the same priority, depending on team and rotations. Finally, for main echoes, there's 2 of them. There's Aix and Jue. Literally have no idea how to pronounce them. But Aix is a weaker option here, and Jue, the new weekly boss, will be her best in slot choice. Obviously, you can still use Aix if you have good stats while farming for Jue, but that's pretty much assumed by this point. And then of course, if you use Lingering Tunes, go for Abomination. Also, since Jue can be cast as a summon, it will deal DOT damage after using skill on enemy, so it's a really nice way to generate incandescent stacks when Jinhsi's off field and you're not using someone like Verena, since she shares spectral attribute damage type. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to Jinhsi's build. So for video skippers, here's an overview of her build, and also you can see the priority in leveling her abilities. Now, when it comes to building teams, as you already probably noticed, building those stacks on Jinhsi is going to be of utmost importance. And the best way to build those stacks is by using coordinated attack units, since they will provide the most stacks. Now, there are currently 5 units in the game who can do this: Verena, Yinlin, Mortefi, Baizhi, and Yuanwu. Out of these 5, the best 3 would be Verena, Yinlin, and Mortefi. So, Verena can provide her boosting, and while she shares Spectral attribute with Jinhsi, which means the stacks will be a bit smaller, but her buffs and healing can easily carry the team. As for Yinlin, honestly, she feels quite slow compared to Verena and Mortefi when it comes to stack generation, but her damage potential is really good here, and you can easily do some quick swapping together with Jinhsi to unload fast and deadly damage. And if you want to, use the Moonlit set with Heron to further boost Jinhsi's damage. Now, as for Mortefi, at 0 sequences, he is a bit weaker than Yinlin and Verena, but at sequence 4, his ultimate's duration becomes much longer and better for stack generation, and also, he can easily use Moonlit and Heron's set. Then, finally, we have Baizhi and Yuanwu. When it comes to Baizhi, she's kinda like Verena, since she can buff damage if you outro with her into Jinhsi and can provide healing. But what's a bit of a letdown with her is the coordinated attack from Ultimate. It can only trigger up to 4 times total, every 2.5 seconds, so less efficient stack generation. Although at S4, she can trigger the coordinated attack 2 more times, but still, she is more or less a budget version of Arena. And then, as for Yuanwu, he's actually pretty nice. If you use the skill and stay inside the circle, you can trigger coordinated attacks every 1.2 seconds. But you also need to stay inside the circle. And this gives me the PTSD thinking about Benny's circle, since you need to stay inside of it. Also, don't use him together with Yinlin, since they share the same attribute and won't generate the stacks efficiently, so just use one of them, whichever you want to. For example, Yuanwu can provide extra sustain for the team and better vibration strength reduction on bosses and some elite enemies. Then there's also Taochi? What? Yeah, since her outro can give a massive skill damage amplification to Jinhsi, she can be used for those nice big damage screenshots. Although you can also slap on her Moonlit or Rejuvenating set with either Bellborn or Heron to provide better boosting. But if you want to sacrifice the stack building with a damage dealer, you can also easily go for Havoc Rover, who actually works nice together with Jinhsi when quick swapping, or even use Jian, Kalkaro, or Sanhua. Finally, you could also go for Jinshin for better liberation damage and grouping if you really want to. And so far, few good teams come to mind. For a completely free-to-play approach, Baiji and Mortefi are recommended, but for the best stack generation, go with Mortefi and either Yinlin or Verena. Right now, I am using Verena and Mortefi since I want some healing, and usually, with these two teams you can comfortably reach 40 stacks easily, and quite often even 50 stacks, for the best stage 4 skill damage. And of course, you can also go for something like Yuanwu plus Verena to get most comfortable survivability, or Yuanwu and Mortefi. Now, before I give my thoughts about Jinhsi, here's a quick recap on whether you should go for her sequences or signature weapon. And basically, her first sequence allows her to stack up additional 80% damage for her stage 4 skill when using her basic attacks or skill in Incarnation, so you can get a bigger number, and it improves her damage by 13%. Then, sequence 2, interestingly enough, allows her to obtain max 50 stacks when she's out of combat for 4 seconds. So, for example, before starting Tower of Adversity, she can already begin the rotation with best skill damage output, but this can be done only once, since afterwards she will remain in combat. Now, sequence 3 essentially provides her with 50% attack after casting her intro skill twice, and it should be possible to maintain this indefinitely with some quick swapping, and it's actually about 20% further damage increase from sequence 1. Then sequence 4 is like nice for the team when casting ultimate or stage 4 skill, boosts attribute damage by bonus 20% for 20 seconds, so not so huge for her, and it's roughly 8% additional personal DPS. And then S5 gives a big boost to ultimate damage, about 15% overall increase. And finally, the last sequence just straight up improves stage 4 skill and stack damage multiplier, providing a total of about 23% damage increase. Overall, her sequences grow in power steadily. Best stopping point would be S1 in my opinion, but if it comes to whether you should get her signature or S1, because of the way you can swap equipment in Tower Adversity, if you're in the need of a strong stat stick like Aegis of Harvest, someone like Kolkaro or Jian or even Taochi will find good use of it, so go for horizontal investment if you want to. And if you don't have Illustrious Razor or Verdant Summit, then it's definitely better to get her signature. Alright, finally, so what do I think about Jinhsi? I mean, yeah, she's an insane nuker, definitely feels broken with the signature weapon, and she's almost like an Archon in Genshin, which I believe she is some sort of magistrate of this current region we're in. So yeah, if you want to experience big numbers and interesting playstyle, she's pretty good for that. It is a bit sad her weapon options are lacking though, so keep that in mind. But as always, this is still a gacha game, so be mindful of your financial situation and don't go crazy with the spending. Anyway, hope you found this video useful, and as always, you can help me out by just pressing like on this video and subscribing to my channel for more wuwa content. Thanks, and see you next time.